Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, we are going to explore dot painting and see what you can do with all these fun tools. Or you can also use tools that you find around the house. You can check out my website for a complete supply list and some suggestions for things that you might already have. And this video, we are going to work on just exploring and having fun with our dot tools. So if you want to know how, stay tuned. Let's get started. All right. So welcome to Dot Painting with Acrylics 101. The first thing I want to talk about is, of course, you need something to paint on. And if you're brand new, you can, I have some suggestions for you, but I'm going to be working on a rock tonight. So this is just a sample of something that I've done in the past. But I already have mine primed, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Typically, if you have a substrate that is porous, it's a good idea, and it's even a good idea no matter what, to go ahead and prime it first, just to make sure that it's got a good base. And you can do that with gesso. I mentioned that before. Gesso is basically acrylic primer. So just like you would do on your home walls, and it comes in black or white. It also comes in gray and other tinted colors. You can tint it with paint if you want. It also comes in clear. So depending on if you want your substrate color to show through, you can always use clear gesso. And I've already got mine ready to go. The one thing you want to do, I'm just going to show you a rock that's not primed. The one thing you want to do is just make sure when you're choosing a rock that it's nice and smooth. This is just some house paint that got on it. I thought it was actually a seagull, but I'm glad it wasn't. When it wouldn't wash off, I realized. But you'll notice there's little pock marks and things in stones. Once you prime it, those probably will level out and fill in. But you don't want it to be rough and kind of bumpy, because that's going to be a really hard surface to paint on. You might also see cracks there, but if there's small cracks, you probably, again, can just easily, a few layers of paint and those are going to disappear. If you're just starting out, it's a good idea to paint on something flat, and you can check your recycling for any packaging for cereal or any other types of food packaging. Don't use the packaging. Well, I would be careful to use the packaging that's for things that are refrigerated, just because they put a wax coat on them. And if you're going to use something like that, make sure you sand it to get the wax layer off. But use the side that's not, if there's a side that's not wax coated, use that. This is a glossy side. I would probably sand that a little bit before priming it. You can see the glossiness of that. So if it's a glossy surface, go ahead and sand it just to rough it up, and then put your primer on it. So I did a few of those. I did some in white, some in black. Then I can paint my base color on top of the primer. So this is a good thing to practice on. It's nice and flat, easy to use. And if it turns out good, you can always use it for a project. You can put it on a greeting card. You can make magnets. There's lots of things that you can do with it if it turns out. If it doesn't, no big deal. You didn't waste really much materials. Another thing that you can practice on is if you have a frame. Now I just have glass from frame, but it's a fairly thick piece of glass, and I taped it off. You have to be really careful if it's not tempered glass, because if it breaks, it can be dangerous. But this is a great tool to practice on. You can also paint on frames and make a picture and then keep it. Here's an example of that. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I did this in a little bit, but you can actually make decorations on frame glass. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to make your acrylics more adhesive to plastic or glass or metal, smooth surfaces. But the cool thing about doing it on the glass as practicing your techniques is a couple things. First of all, you can put any color behind it. So if you want to see how a design would look and you want to see, different colors, you can put paper behind it. The other thing is, when you're done, it doesn't work out, or you don't like it, if you're making a frame, or if you're just practicing technique, you can just basically take a blade, scrape it off, and start over. So this is a great practice sheet, because, you just scrape the paint off and then you're all ready for practice session number 2. So it's a good way to maybe try out designs and things like that to see how they're going to look before you actually put it on something. So that's another way that you can utilize the glass practice sheet. Now, I talked about designs, and when you're creating the design, there are many ways to go about that. As I mentioned with this one, I did it right on the glass, and then I flipped the glass over so the paint is actually behind the glass, so it protects it. I could leave the paint on the outside of it as well, but I just feel like it protects the paint and it's all one sheet. Now, if you do it this way, you're not going to see, if you were to paint any 2-layer dots, you're not going to see any of that. It's going to be very, one layer. So if you want that, you would just have the paint on the outside. And as long as you're not messing with it, rubbing it real hard and stuff like that, it's going to stay on, the paint's going to be probably perfectly fine, even if you don't varnish it. Because if you want to redo it at a later date, you don't want to do a varnish over it to make it permanent. You want to be able to just scrape it off if you decide. So you could have a summer theme, scrape it off, make a new one, make a winter theme, things like that. So it's kind of fun. You can also do it on glass or whatever you want. Now, if you do want it to be permanent and you don't want it to come off the glass later, I had mentioned this before, and I found my version of it. I mentioned this last time. You can get an additive to your acrylic that will make it a little bit stronger adhesive properties. So this is the golden version of it. It's called GAC 200. GAC just stands for Golden Artist Colors. It's not really, like some sort of weird chemistry, but they just have a numbered system. But it doesn't say glass medium, but basically it'll tell you right on there what it's helpful for. And then on the back, you'll find also when you buy acrylic mediums, you'll often find some information about its properties, like transparency. Is it matte or gloss? Is it transparent or opaque? Is it thin or thick? So you can actually check this. If you can't see what's in the bottle, you can find out the properties here. So if I added this to some acrylic paint and then I put it on a mirror, it's going to stick better. It's going to be more scratch proof. I would still suggest putting a varnish over the top, but this will give you a harder, less tacky texture to your paint. And I've even heard you can put a layer of this on the glass first and then do your primer and then the paint. So you can either add it to the paint or you can use it kind of as a sealant. And I also heard that you can use it as a sealant for some woods that might have like linseeds or oils in them that might seep up through the wood and be absorbed into your paint. So you want to seal your wood real well. So there are mediums for that, and this is one of those that's going to create and keep that linseed oil from seeping up into your paint and be weird. All right, other design ways to create the design using sort of like a stencil idea is you can basically print off designs from online, and if you take one of your squares. So what I did, and if you want to know how I did this, remind me later in the program and I can do a demonstration. But I basically just put these designs that I liked onto a Word document. I edited them down to exactly the size I needed. I wanted 3.5 inches. And then, so I know it fits my project, and then I can go in and create like a tracing paper. Now, we've talked about tracing in art, and we've used pencil where you just put pencil lead on the back. In this case, it's not easy to erase pencil from painted surfaces. They don't erase real well, and you could damage your painted surface because usually you have to do it first and then you erase later. So it's easier if you use a chalk base or something that's water soluble. You could, but it's going to show up on your surface. I mean, even like maybe a watercolor pencil or something like that. So I have a pastel pencil that's white. That'll be really good for this. And here's an example of what a guide would look like. Now, this is just a basic guide like for a mandala, but that's what it's going to look like once I draw on there. But what I can do in this case is I can take some chalk pastels and I can just put, you can use whatever color you want. I'm going to use white because that would show up. And I'm just going to put some chalk on the surface of this. Get rid of the dust that it made. Now, I have never done this particular technique before because I usually do with pencils with other art, but it seems like a good idea. So I figured I'd give it a shot and I'll let you guys see the results. So we'll see if this works, but basically then you could just lay it right on your project. Now, don't rub it because you're going to be transferring that chalk. So don't rub it with your fingers like broadly, but then get a tool like a pencil or something. This is just a little ball stylus. And then I can draw out my design however I want. Maybe I want to do these dots. Maybe I want to show these lines here. So hopefully this works. And for this, I don't want all these details, but I just might want to know where I want to place those. So I could just draw a line. It's just a guide. It's not supposed to be your whole design. You could do that here too if I just want to create a line to show where I'm going to be putting those things. And then hopefully once you lift, hoping that this ball is not too soft, but then you're going to have some marks. I had marks where I actually pressed it down too, but you're going to see these marks where your design is as well. And that's going to help you to do your design. And then you can look at this for guidance as you're going along to see where to put each dot. Like on these lines, maybe I just want, it's like I want the big dot here, little dot, little dot, little dot. So you just get an idea of your design. So that's one way you can put it on a flat surface. This might be tricky on a rock, on a rounded surface to do because it's just hard to hold it there and you might be likely to move and just smear all of that chalk on there. So that might be a little trickier. I wouldn't recommend that. But for a rock, for example, they do sell the kits, the dot tool kits, and they come with stencils. Now these stencils I think are too big, but there are stencils out there that are designed for smaller projects. These ones are, like I said, on the bigger side, but they're flexible, so you can kind of bend them over to write in your designs on them if you want to. Now, I like to do freestyle where I just use the dots as guides, and that's what I'm going to be demonstrating for you, but I just wanted you to have some other ideas of what you could do. So I could put that on there. You could use a little bit of that poster tack or something to keep it where you want it so it doesn't move around, or you could just line it up and then you just use your pencil to draw in those patterns that you want. Now you can also, like I showed here, create a mandala design, and you can do this on a rock as well. And on a rock it's a little bit trickier, like I said, because it's not a flat surface. But if you have a soft ruler, you can mark your lines. And in this case, I'm just going to estimate my eyeball. I'm going to say where the center is. So let's say, I'm going to say, you can try to figure it out if you want by measuring, but I'm into just doing some, general eyeball stuff. So I'm going to call that center. And then you can using a flexible or even just, cardstock or whatever, but I can just basically create a line with get this out of the way. I'm going to create my crosshairs on there and then going perpendicular to that. I didn't even go through my circle because I'm actually looking at it from an angle where I'm at. But if you were looking at it straight on, you could see it better. But I want to try to keep it perpendicular to that, and I can draw another line across to get my crosshairs. And then I can keep doing that between. So I can eyeball between those two, and I can just keep drawing it out. I mean, you can get more precise with that if you start measuring between the lines and all of that stuff, but I generally try to keep it a little bit loose. Especially with this, it's just going to be hard because it's not really a standard size. And then if I want to create some of these radial lines like this, like I said, this is a guide for a mandala shape. I can, if I have one of these tools that has measurements, I can use the measurements that are on there. This particular one does not, but this is the only one I have that has an opening for a pencil that's big enough to hold this particular pencil because it's a bit bigger in diameter. But if I don't have the measurements on this tool, I can always use the measurements on any ruler, and I can just make it as wide as I want. So if I want it, 1 centimeter, you know what the markings are on here, I can just open it to the correct width here, and then I go back to my project and put it down, and then I like to rotate the project sometimes rather than depends on what it is. But you want to make sure that you keep it's a little tricky on a rock because the rock is not soft. And so what happens is it can move. So what happened is I had it in the center and then it moved. So you have to be really careful because it could slip around compared to if you have it on a soft surface like paper, it'll go into it and it'll hold it still. But it's a little bit tricky on a rock to do it. But you can get an idea, and then you can just go back here, make it wider, the size that you want, and then come back up here and do the same thing. Again, just being really careful that you don't move that center point, and you'll be able to make your concentric circles. And these are just guides to help you know where you're going to place your dots. And then just so you're consistent, and then you just can go here again and measure out the next distance that you want. Let's see if I can show that. So that's how you would go about marking up a rock. It's a little bit trickier, but it's doable. And then, and the cool thing is once I'm done with my design, because I'm not going to actually use this 4x rock, I'm just going to do it freehand. So I'll be demonstrating that. But I can just go with a wet rag. This is my damp old t-shirt. And at the end, it just washes right off. So after the paint dries, make sure the paint's dried. You can just go in and gently wash away those guidelines. And if you try to do that with a pencil, you'd have to try to erase it, and it doesn't always lift, and you could end up damaging your painted surface. So I don't recommend, that's why I recommend using more of a chalk pencil or something water soluble that you can just wash off very easily without damaging your painted surface. All right, so those are some ways that you can get your design on there ahead of time if you want to. I like to, like I said, be a little bit more intuitive about it, more organic about it, and just create them as I go along, and that's what I will be demonstrating. But I wanted you guys to know some options. This is something I found at the dollar store, and this has a chalk surface on it. It'll say that on the packaging. And they're little like ornaments or something, but you could also buy those. It's kind of a hard stock, and it's got already a matte surface that would be, not bad to paint on, or else you could put I would have probably put a coat of gesso on it anyway, but that allows you to practice doing round. Now, how would I do this? How would I measure out my guide if it's round? It's a little bit trickier. There's different ways to do it, but what I like to do is I just figure out where the thickest part of the circle is. So it's easier here. It's easier if you kind of stand it up. And then what I do is I run, especially like a clear, if you have trying to get everything in the frame. If you have a clear ruler, that's helpful, but you don't have to have one. But I just run it along, and then I look at my measurements and I see where it cuts to the highest point. And then when it starts to go back down the other way, gets smaller, I know that right before that is my center point. Again, I like to eyeball it, but if I don't want to eyeball it, I can do it that way. And then I mark that as I mark the center there, and then I just turn it perpendicular, and then I do the same thing on the other side. And then I get my two little crosshairs in the middle, and that tells me where my center is. Again, I like to just eyeball it, but I don't always get it right, and I don't care. So it's up to you. It's up to you if you care or not. Or again, you can use some kind of stencil. Like this would be really, this is almost exactly the right size. So I could just shift this so it's centered, and then I can mark my center there just using this tool. So if you have a stencil that has an opening in the middle, you could kind of use that as a guide as well. And then you could do your crosshairs and all of that. All right. The next thing, of course, we have to think about is paint. And paints come in all different formulas. We talked about how to change paint in its functionality as far as being adhesive, but it's really important when you're doing dot painting that you have the right viscosity. You'd want to use a fluid paint, and if it's a professional grade, it might actually say fluid, like this says. This actually says fluid on it. See if I can get it there. So if you're going to be using this brand, it actually says fluid. If they're in bottles, they're typically some level of fluid, but they can still even be just different consistencies within the different brands, or even within the same brand. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, these two are the same brand, but I think they're very different consistencies. So let's just look at them. I'm just gonna force them out and see what, because this one feels a lot there, feels more liquidy. Now these fluid ones, especially the craft ones, I do shake them a little bit because sometimes the craft ones can separate a little bit. You're not probably going to find that with higher end ones, but you might see that with fluids. Okay, so I'm just going to pour a little bit of this in there, and that's real. See how runny that is? How drippy? That's really thin, and that's a little too thin for what I like. Like that's almost like a thick cream consistency, and maybe like a heavy cream, but it's not the consistency that I want. So one of the challenges is getting the right consistency. Now you'll notice I'm using these little caps, and I'll talk a little bit about the palette in a minute, but these are just caps off of old bottles of drinks. Now this same brand.
You're a little blurry.
Is it blurry?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if I can get it to. I don't know if I can just move it. Is that better?
I can see the containers, but I can't see your bottle that you have.
Okay. Well, these are what I'm trying to focus on right now.
Exactly.
So, okay, let me shake this one up. Even just when I shake it, I can hear the difference. What I want is like a yogurt drink. So see how that flops down a little bit, and then you get these little peaks, and then they spread out. That's more what I want. I want it to start off with a little peak, and then I want it to level out. I don't want it to be running like that. So I would want to thicken this up. This one looks pretty good as is, and it's going to be different depending on paint. And like I said, these are the same exact brand and just different colors, and they're different formulas. So one suggestion I have is, I have heard from a lot of artists that the Deco Art Americana comes out of the bottle pretty good consistency for this particular technique. So that's a good choice for dot artists. I don't have any of that in my art arsenal, but that's what I've heard. So if you're just buying paints, that might be a good option. Now this is a white. This is a different brand. Let's just look at the consistency of this one here. Or I already have one up here. So what I would do is, if I had more than one white, I might go and find one that's already the consistency I like. Now that's real that's real stringy. See how it creates those long strings? I don't necessarily like that either. So I don't love that it's real stringy. That might be good for something else. But so that's just one way to see, okay, maybe that's not the best, or maybe I can mix those two together and maybe that'll work. I don't know. We'll play around with it. But they're all a little bit different. So, and it's hard to tell, of course, when you're buying the bottle, what it's going to be. Now, these are from Joann's. These are the colors I'm going to be using tonight. Now, as far as colors go, I do recommend a simple palette. Try not to do anything complex if you're fairly new. And if you have a color wheel, great. You can pick colors that are next to each other on the wheel are always pretty safe. Those are analogous colors, and those are generally safe they play nice together. So, so you can pick those. If you're not sure and you don't have a color wheel, think rainbow, Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, Roy G. Biv. And so picks anything in that order. When you get to the end, you start with back at the beginning. Anything that's next to each other in that order will work nice together. Now, these ones are basically the green and yellow, which are right next to each other. And then this is a blue-green, which is within 4 from each other. This is just basically mixing some blue with green. So they're all kind of, they're kind of happy together. And I always want to have some white because I want to tint it, meaning I'm going to lighten them, and I can change the colors up by doing that. I can also mix the colors together to see what I get doing that. So I might play around with that as well. Now, if you have something like this in a tube, it's typically going to be a little bit thicker and probably too thick for this type of project. But there are ways to remedy that as well. And I'm going to talk about thinning and thickening in a little bit. But when I squeeze that out, oh, I'm blocking the view. When I squeeze that out, see how thick that is? And that's maybe like a soft body, but it's not fluid. And then there's heavy body, which is even thicker than that. It's going to be more like, more like, this is kind of, oh, there's a hole at the bottom.
Oh, no.
This actually explains a lot, because earlier today, I'm like, how did I get paint? I was getting paint everywhere. I thought, how did I get paint? And that brings me to a really good point that I wanted to make. So I guess that's my lesson there. I'm gonna have to figure out how to seal that. That's not the point. The point is when you're working with acrylics, make sure that you are wearing protective. I'm wearing a protective smock or a apron to protect your clothes, or wear clothes that you don't care about, because even when you're trying to be careful, things happen, as you can see. So that's a good example of, unexpected, not so happy accidents. And I also keep my surface protected. This is actually a doggy potty pad, or you could, they're called chucks in the medical world, but they work really good because they have a sort of some fabric-y stuff on one side that's absorbent and an absorbent material, and then on the other side they're plastic. So they keep anything from getting all the way through, but you can kind of use it to wipe your brushes and things like that as well. And if you spill something, it doesn't run all the way across your table. So it's kind of a nice option when it comes to protecting your surface. Now, give me a second. And I hate to waste all that paint, so I'm going to take my journal. This is just one of those composition books that I use for doing art journaling. And I have some primed pages. So I'm just going to take my page and I'm going to stick it on there. So now it's on my page, and I can maybe use that for another project, because I don't want to get this on my other projects. I'm just going to put a new layer down. Not the whole thing. I'm just gonna lay something over it. something I've already used. I reuse these for a long time because once it dries, it can be used again. So, okay. So back to the program. So that's more like toothpaste, and that is too thick. So you're going to want to thin that down. Now, talking about thickening and thinning, I've mentioned before in the intro class that one way to do an archival thinning is by using a fluid acrylic medium. And that's what this is. This is a pouring medium, and it's really fluidy, and you can see the stats here. It says transparent versus opaque. It's very transparent, and it's fluid versus thick, and it shows it just a little bit to the right of fluid. So, so if you can't tell just by looking, you can usually kind of see how it is, but you could add this to thin that one. So if I wanted to use this one, I could add a little bit. I always start with a little bit and then add more. I can also add a little bit of water as long as I'm not going, you know, over the quote unquote 25%. I can add a little bit of water. So if that's just still not thin enough, I can have a little bit of water ready to go. This is my bigger, I have a little bottle that I usually use. See if I can not put too much in there. And then I can see if I can get a good consistency. Sometimes when you are mixing to get the right consistency, you can put air bubbles in there. So just keep an eye on those, because if it's in your paint when you actually do the dots, they can kind of boil up and create these little craters in your project. So look for those. You can tap, you know, you can, if it's fluid enough, like here, you can see the bubbles in this. Let me show you that. See those bubbles? So I can try tapping. See how I tapped and they just popped. So that's good. I see one there. So I can tap it and that'll pop the bubbles. And also if they don't pop, you can take a little pin and try to pop them until you get all the bubbles out. Because like I said, if there's bubbles in it when you do the dots, it can mess up your the look of your picture. Okay, so now that's a better consistency and I can test that out. So let's just see what these look like. I'm going to get out my glass practice sheet and let's see what some of these do. See if they're the right consistency. I'm going to talk about tools in just a second, but here I'm going to do, okay, here's a chopstick. This is really big. Okay, so if I dip that in there, and then I'm just going to go straight down and touch my surface. I'm not going to smash it down. I'm just going to touch and lift. Now, see how it peaked up, but it's slowly smoothing out and it's flattening. So that means that it's not going to probably keep a peak. If it does, if you don't like that shape and it starts to harden that way, or you're afraid it's not going to work, you can always go in with another tool and just smooth it out. So if you put one down and maybe it was too thick and it kept a peak, you could remedy it that way and then just thin out your next, thin out your paint a little bit more. All right, now let's see how the other color looks. Now this is, can't remember which one this is, but maybe I'll find out when I do it. I'm touching it in. And then I'm, again, just touching down without pressing. Oops, I'm almost off my camera angle. It's upside down, so it's reversed. Okay, so see how that's flattening out? It's not leaving a peak there, so that's fine. You don't want it to be flattening out too much. But if it starts to grow, then that's probably too thin. If your circle starts to get bigger, all right, this one definitely shows more peak. And like I said, I want a little bit of a peak because I don't want to be too runny. I don't want it to be really, I shouldn't say peak. I just want it to have a little something in the middle, and then it'll flatten out slowly rather than it just completely spread out. So you can try out your paints on your practice to see how they behave. If you don't get any kind of shape, if it just spreads, then it's too thin. If you get a peak and it starts to flatten, it's great. If you get a peak and it doesn't go away, then it's too thick. Oops. Didn't lay it all the way down. Okay. This is creating a shape. Part of it is I think I pushed it down too much, but I think this is too thick because it's holding that shape. It's not flattening down. Let me show you guys closer up. So I still have to thin that a little bit more to make it the right consistency. Let me see if I can see how it has that shape on top and it's not flattening out. It's not smoothing out. It's holding that shape. It's not exactly a peak, but it's a tool mark. That's too thick. You want it to self level, if you will, to some extent. This one might be a little bit thin. If I'm doing it on the side of a rock, for example, it might start to run. Like if I tip this up, that's another test. If I tip this up at an angle and it starts to run, then that's going to be too thin for your project, especially if you are on the side of a rock. I think this one might be just on the little, I'm getting like a tear, kind of a pool, and this one's not really moving. I think these two are good, and this one is a little thin, and this one's a little thick. So that's what that would be. I don't know if you guys can see this paint, but see how it's pooling at the edge of that dot? That's because it's a little bit runny. And if it was sideways when you put it on there, it'd probably just start running right at the beginning and already be a weird shape. I let it sit for a little bit so it started to dry. So it's good to just test out your formulas and see, if you got the right consistencies. And then that way, when you actually do your project, you're not going to have those problems. Okay. We'll get back to the paints in just a minute. The next thing I want to talk about is the tools. And like I said, anything that is round in shape, like a dowel or a pencil. Now, this one, this is a used eraser, but a fresh eraser is nice and round. That would work. And also the pencil lead would work. So you could use both sides of a pencil. You can use both sides of a Q-tip as well. On one side, you can leave, you can take a little bit of the cotton off. In fact, I'll show you. Take some of that cotton off so it's not too squishy. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of paint on it and smash it down because you want it to be firm. If it's too squishy, it's going to be different size dots. It's not going to be consistent. So you can use your gesso, or you can just use paint, and then you just want to basically rotate it in your fingers and get some paint on it so that now it's a little bit firmer, and it's the paint's going to be not absorbing in the cotton because it's going to just be on the other paint. And then the other side, also, you just take all of the cotton off, and then you've got another flat tip there that you can use. So that would work as a tool. You can use the bottom of paintbrushes, round chopsticks. And of course, I have that list online of a full list of some fun things you can use. You can use a toothpick for fine details. You can even use a pin for fine details if you want really fine dots. Here's the full eraser that I have, and then I just have it on one of these big tacks, and I can use this side or this side for this tool. Or you can use makeup bottles. As long as they're smooth, you don't want them to be concave, like For example, see how the bottom of this kind of goes in a little bit? That could probably make some bubbles. So you want it to be completely smooth. That wouldn't work. I wouldn't use that either. It's got kind of a concave shape. So as long as it's either rounded or flat at the tip and then round in shape, it should work fine. If you want to have tools, they're actually pretty reasonably priced. You can find them online. This one came with those stencils that I showed earlier. I have a bunch of those stencils. Again, those stencils are kind of large for my projects, but it comes with a lot of different size tools. And each of these are kind of like those nail art tools, styluses, embossing tools, whatever you want to call them. They come in different sizes, and then each tip has a different size. So what I did is I went through, and I suggest doing this, whether it's DIY tools or purchase tools, is go in and make a little guide sheet so that you know what tool makes which size. Now, these ones that get smaller and smaller, that's because one tool can make these different sizes, and I'll show how to do that in a second. But this way I can see, oh, this is the size I want, and this is the tool that I need to make that size. So I even did it with some of my, at home things. Make sure you use a contrasting color. So either black on white cardstock or white on black cardstock. I wouldn't use regular printer paper. Use a cardstock at least, because the paint's real wet and it'll just warp your paper. But that will give you an idea of what size the tools make, and then for your project you'll know what to do. Now, I prefer personally the ball tools, because I can do that technique where they get smaller and smaller. It's called walking the dots, and I'll be demonstrating that in a second. But those are not, you can't really do that with the flat tools. Those can be done with the round tools. So I prefer these, but these look large. Like this tip looks like it would be a really large dot, but you have to be aware that it's only really this very tip of it that's going to be dropping that paint. And so the size is not as big as you would imagine. So this is the size that this ball, the largest size that this ball makes. And this one makes a bigger size over here, even though this is actually bigger than this. This makes a bigger dot when you put it down. So just be aware of that. And I'll be using these tools for tonight. And then I talked a little bit about what you might use for a palette. And this was something that I used before. If I'm going to mix a bunch of paints ahead of time and I want to save them to finish the project later, I can put them in these little wells. And then I actually have, and I heard this from someone, I could put it in the freezer, and I did, and they were fine the next time. I just pulled them out, let them thaw, and they worked fine. Now, whether that's archival, whether I wouldn't do that if I was selling any projects, but for just your own crafts and things like that, it worked fine. Or the refrigerator too, but that just sealed in the moisture in them, and then they stayed fine. Another option is I could put these caps into a container with moisture. Hello, everyone. Just a little reminder to please like, subscribe, share, and comment to help my channel get noticed. If you like the content, please help me out. All right, let's get back to the program. So this is a little just seal tight container. This is a chamois material. I can put water in. Just put it below to keep the moisture in the space, and then put these caps in there and just keep that moisture in there. Put those in the freezer, or even if they're not in the freezer or refrigerator or freezer, they can still just keep it moist for the night, so I can finish, or for a few hours or whatever, so I can finish my project at a later date. Because once you mix them, it's hard to match them again. That's when it's important, especially to be able to save your paints. Okay, and then I talked about thickening and thinning the paints. If it's too thin, like this one's too thin, I can actually go in with some of the gel medium, But if you put in a soft gel, and this is what this looks like, that'll thicken that up a little bit. So that's what the soft gel looks like. And then I have an even, this one's a heavy, super heavy gel. You know, these are two different brands, so they might call their, you know, they might have different names for it, but that's the golden soft gel. And then this is the super heavy, which is, this is almost more like a hair wax, and that's more like a hair gel, this one. So, but you could add a little bit of that and that'll thicken that up. Or you could try the DIY version of adding the cornstarch, but again, I don't know how archival that would be, but it's worth exploring. And then at the end of your project, in order to make it durable, you would want to do a varnish. And if it's going to be indoors, you just choose the varnish that has the finish you like. So this one is a high gloss varnish, and that's what I used for this. So see how shiny that is. The paints themselves were matte. Well, they were various. Some were satin, some were matte. So they didn't really have any cohesion in their finish. So I just did the coat of the varnish in gloss, and it just brought everything together, made everything gloss. And so everything matched, and it also seals and protects it. So that's a great option. Now, if you're going to be putting it outside in the garden, then you want to use something that is for outdoor use. This is indoor outdoor. Let's see if I can get that in there. So this is a spray, and it's a satin finish, and it's indoor outdoor. So I would probably, this is just what I have. They, you know, they might have different formulas of it, but then you can put this over the outside of it, and then you can make sure it cures really well before you put it outside, and then it'll be fine and keep it from disintegrating quickly over time. All right, those are all the supplies. Let's get to it, because oh my gosh, it's already 8:04. All right, so let me just get some paints out real quick. Like I said, I always want to tell you more than I have time for. Okay, so that's flattening out. It's not holding a peak, so it's not too thick. It's probably a good consistency so far. Looks good. So yeah, all three of those look like decent consistencies from what I can see so far. Then I might want to mix a lighter shade of something. So let's see, I'm going to do, I liked this consistency better. So I'm going to use this white. I'm going to put a little bit of white in there and some of this color. I like to use just a popsicle stick, or you can use a chopstick or something. Now, if you don't have a lot of paints, you could just use one color and dilute it with or mix, I'm sorry, not dilute it, but mix it with the white and create several different shades of that one color, and you're good to go. You don't have to have, three different colors. In fact, I think I want more white in there because that didn't really lighten it up as much as I thought. I'm trying to lighten this color, but I think that's pretty close to it, and I want it to be a little more obvious that it's different. Okay, this is, I think, this is my thick or my thin paint. I wonder if I add some of this formula to it, if it'll thicken it up. Okay, so I've got a little bit of lighter shade of that blue. That might be still a little bit thin, so I can try adding a little bit of that gel. It's a good idea when you're mixing a bunch of colors to let them sit a little bit to get those bubbles out. Now this one was the thick one, and if I add that real liquidy, oops, let me get that. That was the thick one, and I added a little bit of that fluid gel, but maybe I'll just mix some of this real liquidy white into it. And then that, you know, so you can mix thin formulas with thicker formulas and try to you know, get the right formula you're looking for. So that's one way to do it. If you don't have, any thinning agents. Again, you can just use a little bit of water. If you had real thick paint, you're not going to want to try to thin it with water because you'd probably have to use too much. All right. Got lots of different paint options there. Thing that I like about these as a paint palette, these little caps, is I can pick up the color I'm using and go right to my project. Instead of holding a big palette, you know, like I can just grab that one color and be right here with it, you know. So that's why I like using the caps or the little portable containers, because that gives you that option. Okay. So let me see if I can get this in a right angle. Okay, so here we, before I do that, I want to actually show you a couple different patterns that I might be using. Back to the techniques for a minute. Okay. As I said, for technique wise, so there's these two different types of tools and they behave a little bit differently. So if you have a flat tip versus a rounded tip, they're going to behave a little bit differently. With the flat tip, you're going to typically want to go into the paint each time, load it up, and then go straight down, touch, and then straight up. Don't press it all the way down. You don't want to necessarily make contact with the surface, because if you do, sometimes this did okay, but sometimes it'll create an air bubble in there, and sometimes you'll also slide, like you might slip as you go. So you don't necessarily want to go down to the ground. So just be careful to try to straight down and then just touch and then release before you bottom out. Ideally, sometimes you're going to hit the ground, and if you get a weird mark, you can always go in there with a stylus tool and fix it. Now with the ball, because you're just touching a little bit of the surface, it doesn't have that problem that you might find with the flat ones. So you can actually, I think, without fear a little bit more, touch it all the way down to the bottom. Now load it up real good. You want to keep that loaded the same each time, because the size of the dot it's going to make is based on how much paint's on there, and then also how long you touch the surface. So I'm going to touch this straight down vertically, touch, lift, and then if I keep doing that, touch, lift, touch, lift, lift, touch, lift, touch, lift, I can keep making smaller and smaller dots for a long time, because more of the paint kind of comes down, but not as much, a little bit less and less and less. So it makes these really cool graduated size dots. Now let's try that with the flat tool and see if we can get the same thing. You probably get a little bit of that, but it's not going to be as easy to get that. And when you do run out of paint, it's going to be a little more obvious. Okay, so I'm going to touch, touch, touch. See, I'm on my third one and I've already lost my round shape. So maybe you get 2 out of it, but maybe not as many. Whereas this, I can go for quite a ways before it actually stops laying down a little bit of paint. So that's why I like the ball, is because of that. Now, another thing that you can do with the ball that you can't really do with these flat tools is, and this is going to be true of really any of the round tools that you use, you can do the same thing. It doesn't have to be these balls, but these just work really nice. But you can set it down and then you can swipe and, oops, wrong way. See how I made this little paisley shape? So I set it down and then swipe. So very easy. And I can go straight too. I don't have to make a curve. I can just go straight. Now, the other way you can do it if you have flat tools, let's try to do that with this. It's not going to work, but we'll just see what happens. If I set down this flat tool and I swipe, it's not really working. I mean, it's kind of, you know, blobby. I can't get that nice. And then, yeah, I can't get too. But what I could do, if let's say I want this size circle and I don't have that in a round tool, I can put it down. I can put down my dot, and then I can take a round tool and I can draw it out. A smaller tool, sorry. So I can basically draw with my ball styluses, and I can get the shape that I want. So you can play around with what you can do with your stylus and making different patterns and different shapes. Maybe I just want the top part of a circle to have a little tail. I can put it down, and then I can just make a little whip with the ball stylus. This paint's starting to get empty. There's not a lot of paint left there. Another thing you can do when you're doing this walking the dots. So just keep in mind that every time you touch, it's going to get smaller and smaller. So let's say I want to make something that is like a leaf shape, petal, right? And I have a dot there, and I want it to go around the other side. Oh, let me get closer to you guys. I want you guys to see what I'm doing here. I don't know about this angle, but there we go. Let me get closer there. Okay. So I want to walk the dots. Let's see, I'm making a petal. I put my big dot, and then I'm going to walk it around smaller and smaller. And then I want to make the other side. But if I start here, it's going to be bigger. It's going to be the same size as that one. So I'm going to go back to that same dot, and then I'm going to walk the dots from there. And that way I get the same size on either side of that. So that's one way that you can get the correct sizes. You can also do a different size with a different stylus here, and then use a smaller tool to start from the next rung and then work down. If you run out before you get to the smallest size, just go to the smaller tool and drop it in. It's not sticking to the glass. There we go. So if you know, there are ways to remedy problems as they come along. And we'll work on that when we actually come across those problems. Then another cool technique that is hard to show you because all of these are wet. I should have left some of those dry ones. Maybe I can show that to you later. But essentially, once these are dry, you can do another, like almost the same size, but smaller. You can do another dot, and you can continue and do bunch of layers of dots going smaller and smaller, but make sure it's completely dry before you do that, or else it's going to mix in with it. Now I might want to mix in with it. Maybe I want to try that, play around. I'm running out of paint, but this is not dry, but maybe I want to just tap in something while it's wet. Oh, I just lost that. Didn't even show the new color. There we go. So that one's blending in with it. So, you know, try some fun techniques, see what you get. All right, now let's get to working on it, and hopefully I can demonstrate the layering effect. But basically what it can look like is like, you know, see how this is two colors of blue. I have a white with blue on top. You know, I have these are the beige with white on top. So you can layer them and get some fun effects just by how you layer them. Try out things on your glass and then, you know, do the real stuff on your project. Okay, so let's get to project at hand. You can pick a design that you like, something that you want to follow along with, or just like I like to do kind of an organic process, like I mentioned before, where I just try to use my intuition as I go along and see what happens. So I'm just going to eyeball my center. I'm setting it down and lifting. It's my first dot. And if I like this size and I want to include it, I can put some, and I like this color, I can just dip back in. Now, what I like to do is basically use the other one as a guide. So I'm making a T. So I went on this side of the dot and this side of the dot, and now I'm going to rotate it and go the top of the dot. I go back each time. So I created a little bit of a kind of a mandala guide with those. Now I could keep going with the same color, or I can pick another color. Make sure you wipe your tool off real well. You don't want to mix your colors, and you can just wipe it on a rag. And then I'm going to go in between those. I'm going to bring in another color. And if I want them the same size, I have to go back and dip every time. So now I'm going to go between those two. And I'm using those as my guide of where I'm placing it. Dipping in each time so that I get the same size, because I don't want them to get smaller and smaller. All right, now I'm going to get a smaller tool and I'm going to go between those two. So now those are my guide. And I always go equidistant from my subject, and then I fill in, I do between those two. Instead of trying to do it around, I use them as a guide. So now I go in between the previous dots, and I just keep doing that until I have filled the space, or it's too small for the dot that I want to do. So I can leave it like that, or I can put smaller dots there, or I can try to fit another dot, but I don't want them to touch. Maybe I'll fit another dot, but like a little bit out, not right in the same line, just because I don't want to touch them. This one's kind of stringy. I don't like that. If you have stringy paint, make sure you lift straight up and break that string before you move your hand, or else you'll run a string right across your work. And you don't want to do that, trust me. Been there, done that. There's always ways to remedy things, but it's better if you can avoid them. So it's coming along great. I like what's happening. And the thing I want to do is add some dimension, because see, the colors are kind of flat, and I can add the dimension with the second layer. So, but because this is a little bit of a three-dimensional, you know, it's not as thin as if you brushed it on a canvas, it would dry really, really quickly. But this has a little bit of a dimension in the thickness of the paint. So it does take a little bit longer for it to dry all the way before it's going to be safe for me to do that. And that's the challenge with, you know, with time constraints. But I could just, you know, keep playing with it, keep fussing with it. I'm probably going to go in with some of these other colors. Like I'll go in with a darker green and make it just slightly smaller. Then I'll go in with this dark blue, or maybe I'll even put the yellow on top. I don't know. I will have to finish that on my own, and I'll post pictures on the Facebook group and on the meetup group. But that's the basic start. And then you can even add metallics and things like that on the top, or other details. Now I can even do that with these little slides. I can put a dot there, or I can run dots all along, or I can even do a touch and slide. So lots of fun details I can still add to it once I let that dry. But definitely I would say, you know, even just overnight, give it a chance to completely dry before you to mess with it. And I don't recommend the hair dryer. That's the word. All right, let me put mine aside and see what you guys have been working on, see what questions that we have. Hello everyone. I just wanted to do a little follow-up. I did go ahead and finish some of the top layers. As you can see, I did some decorative dots. I did some bigger dots, different locations. I mean, I just basically gave it a little more interest in dimension by layering some shapes on top of the original shapes. And I did go in, I noticed a few little mishaps in there, a dot here, some of that stringy paint dropped where I didn't want it. So I just went in with black and covered some of those areas, or I just repainted some areas that one that I smeared while I was talking. So I fixed some of those just by going back in and correcting it. So that's basically the finished project. Thank you everybody so much for joining me for another episode of Healing Art After Hours. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share and comment if you like this content. Thank you so much. And as always, happy creating. See you next time. Bye.